I just want to start off by saying I read a lot of books like this. It's part of my job, but it's also something that I just enjoy personally. And this is one of the best. It really, really is. I couldn't put it down. I coach a lot of actors and creative professionals, and ever since I've read this book, I started reading it when I was asked to do this, I've been referencing these stories because they're so fantastic and poignant. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more specifics about it with you, Gillian. So we're here to talk about the collected stories in this book that can offer guidance for you as actors and creative professionals. I'm assuming you're all actors, and some of you do other things as well. Can I see a show of hands, like who feels like they're multifaceted, lots of different things? Yeah, okay. So we're talking about it all here, but I also want to say that this book really speaks to life as well. There's a lot of inspiration life-wise, and especially with what's going on right now, I think it can really help give us some perspective. So I want to start, Gillian, by asking you to share your story, kind of how this book came to be. What was the seed for you?
Well, growing up, I never really had a mentor, and I used to look at people who sort of had it all figured out and were, doing really well and at the top of their fields, and I'd wonder how did she figure out what she wanted to do, and how did that guy get so successful when other people might have given up? So I just figured I would ask, and so I took 30 people who were all at the top of their fields in a broad range of fields, and I sat down with them and I asked them to tell me how they got there and to focus on failures and obstacles and lessons they learned. And then I also asked them to sort of distill the best advice and wisdom that they had to offer.
I have to admit, I went on Amazon and I was in my research, was reading some of the reviews, the 5 stars. They were fantastic. You guys should check them out. And one of them really talked about how special this book was because you were able to, I'm going to paraphrase, but it sounded as if they were talking to a trusted friend. And I'm curious how you were able to get such candid, honest. It just felt like these were not canned answers that people were just sort of spouting out. That you hear these, incredibly successful people telling when they do every interview. These felt like I felt like we had a window into an intimate conversation with you and them. So are you best friends with all of them?
It's a good question, and I've been asked that before, so I'm going to answer to the best of my abilities to what I think, and I'll tell you the process. But basically, I did all of the interviews in person, and partly because I had no money, I just would show up, just me with a backpack, like with my camera, not a fancy entourage or anything. So it set kind of a casual stage. They would always say, whenever I was showing up at someone's office, they said, give the names of all the people you're showing up with. And I'd say, just me, anyway. So it was me with like my iPhone recording it. So it was pretty casual. And then, I knew when I was in there with each person that this was my one shot, and I knew I'd be really upset with myself if I didn't ask all the questions that I wanted to know. So if someone gave kind of, a very light answer, I would sort of get in deeper with the stuff. And the worst that could happen is that they would say no. And then one other thing is that I told everybody that they could read. I said, just speak, and you can read the essay and change anything you want if you want to change it before it goes to print. Because a lot of times people don't know if you're going to be out to get them or make them look bad if they don't know you. And I had very few changes in the end because my whole point was to celebrate what these people have to offer and how they can help. So they were all happy with the way they came across.
Yeah, you did. It was fantastic. I want to, prior to publishing your first book, teachers at the International Center of Photography gave you the advice that we hear a lot of artists get out of the gate, intern with a professional, build a resume, and then go ahead and try to get your book published. And you took a different route. Can you talk about that moment that you described in the book where you essentially kind of took the bull by the horns and started representing yourself?
Yes. Well, so I had gone to law school and I was working in a business, and then I decided that I wanted to pivot and become a photographer. So it was while I was in photography school that I had the idea for my first book, which was New York Characters, and there was a photography teacher who had a book published. Well, first of all, when I asked people for advice, they said, nobody likes a whippersnapper. No one likes somebody. It's sort of like a fraternity mentality. If they had to go through all these steps to get to where they are, they think that you should too. So no one really liked, somebody who was just a student saying, I want to publish a book. So there was, well, we've got a lot of years before that little lady, And so I tried the traditional route, which was getting, an agent and having them shop the idea, but I could not get a book agent because I was a photography student and you need a little more. So what I did is I parked myself in the bookstore and I looked through all the books to sort of understand the lay of the land and see which publishing houses might publish the kind of book that I wanted to do. And I made a list of those publishers. And then I went further and I looked in the acknowledgement section of the books to see which editor worked on the book. And I made a list of a hit list of the editors that I wanted to target. And at the very top was this guy named Jim Mars, who was at W.W. Norton. And I went straight for him. And I asked one of my photography teachers who had had a couple books published by this guy to make an introduction. And it was kind of difficult. He said, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to Florida next month, and then I'll ask him when I get back, kind of a thing. But I kept on it, and he finally called Jim, and I went in and I met him, and Jim published the book. So
they kept on it and kept on it piece?
That's the key.
You guys,
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I see a lot of actors struggling when it comes to asking for help. You didn't just ask for help, you asked for help, and then you kept going.
And then I kept going, yes. Yeah, you can't just ask once.
Yeah. So I want to jump into some of these stories. A big theme throughout the book that I noticed was coupling this idea of passion with hard work. And I'm particularly reminded of Michael Bloomberg's story and Anderson Cooper's stories, where they both essentially say that you have to outwork everyone around you in order to succeed, but you also need to be passionate about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to end up resenting, whatever it is that you're going after.
Yes.
Can you speak more about those?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the passion part comes into play because nothing is easy. Nothing's easy. Even people, if you looked at them and you thought it was easy, they've gone through tough times too. It could even have been in childhood, but, or a career that looks like it's going great goes through a dry spell. So in order to sort of have the fuel to persevere and to jump the inevitable hurdles that will be in your way, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. If you're not, you might do an okay job, but you're never really going to be a big success. One of the people in the book is a guy named Hans Zimmer, who's a film score composer. He did the, music for The Lion King and tons of movies. Yeah, everything. He says, whenever I need legal or medical advice, I stand up in front of my orchestra because half are doctors and half are lawyers whose parents forced them to do it. So they obviously didn't have the passion. Anyway, so that's really a key thing. And then the next part is that nothing is easy. So you really have to do what you've got to work hard. And Michael Bloomberg, there's a story in his essay that I love. As we all know, he was mayor of New York for 3 consecutive terms, and then he worked at Solomon Brothers, an investment bank. He worked there for 15 years, and then he was fired. And he loved it. He loved it there. He thought he was doing great, but the company got restructured and he got fired. And no one swooped in to get him, to offer him a job. So he decided to start his own company. And he started a company called Bloomberg. And that's how he's the multi-billionaire that we know now. But when he was starting this business, and this is like, he had already been working for 15 years, and this is after going to business school. He decided he needed feedback, and he couldn't get access to the high, level professionals that he wanted to access. So what he did is every morning at like 6 a.m, he went to this deli across from Merrill Lynch's headquarters, and he would get a tray with 2 coffees, one with milk, one without, and 2 teas, one with milk and one without. And then he would go up and roam the halls looking for a high-level executive who happened to be sitting there alone reading the paper. And he'd pop his head in the door and say, "Hey, I brought you coffee. Do you mind if I bend your ear?" And the guy would, he said that if someone said, "I don't drink coffee," he'd say, "Well, then I have tea." And he figured no one would kick him out after that. And that's how he, got the information to launch his career. And then Anderson Cooper had an incredible story. His story, well, first of all, he's somebody who a lot of people like to look at and imagine that he got his foot in the door via connections, because he comes...
I had no idea about his story.
He comes from a very rich family. His mother's Gloria Vanderbilt, yeah. And so people like to think that he had it easy, but his essay starts with talking about how his father died undergoing heart bypass surgery when he was 15, and then when he was, like maybe 21, his 23-year-old brother committed suicide by jumping off the terrace of their family's penthouse apartment. So even though he was living in a penthouse, it was not, a happy existence. And so he finally, he went through a really tough time from these traumas, but when he finally decided he wanted to be a foreign news correspondent, he could not get even an entry-level job at any major network. So one of his friends from high school worked at this place called Channel One, which is an agency that does programmings for high schools. And he finally got his break as a fact checker for Channel One. And he realized something that I think was really interesting. He realized that when you're in a job, people tend to sort of pigeonhole you in whatever role you're in. And sometimes if you want to change people's perception, you have to do something drastic. So no one's going to come up to you and say, "You know what? You would be great on air. Like, why don't we just put you in front of the camera?" It would be great if the world worked that way, but it doesn't. So people just looked at him as the fact checker. So what he did is he quit his job. He borrowed a friend's video camera. He went overseas to sort of war-torn regions, and he lived on $5 a day, and he slept on rooftops and bug-infested motels, and he shot stories, and he made them as interesting and dangerous as possible. And then he turned around and sold them back to Channel One, that little, high school company. And that is how he launched his career. That's how, he started being the on-air person.
These backstories are fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I'm the first one to admit, I just jumped to conclusions with people's stories, and that's what one of the things that you came out of this book is really seeing the struggle.
And the point is, like, if you want something to happen, you have to make it happen yourself. You can't wait around and think someone's going to notice, like, what a great actor you are. If you're, you've got to keep on doing things,
Yeah. We talk a lot about, in our coaching about being proactive versus reactive. It's a very reactive industry. It's very easy to just react to what's on Facebook and what's out there. And I think there's no one way to make it in this industry, and you really have to carve out your path and figure out what that is, starting from a place of passion. And that's what the other thing with Anderson Cooper that I remember from his story is this was it. Like there was nothing else he wanted to do.
He says he had no plan B. He wanted to do it so badly that he didn't have a plan B. And he also says something else that's funny about asking permission. He says that had he asked permission, like to, I want to go and do, go to war-torn regions, or people would have said no because it's a lot easier to say no. And he says that when he really wants to do something, he just does it, because if you start asking, it just opens up your plan to be crapped on. Those are his words.
I feel like Spanx, what's the name of?
Sarah Blakely.
Sarah Blakely, right? Her story too illustrates that.
She talks about keeping a young idea secret. Yeah. Her story, every woman here knows what Spanx are, but for the men who might not know, they're sitting next to someone wearing them.
That's likely.
Because we women try to hide them. But it's a shapewear company where it's sort of like comfortable, shaping undergarments. And she is, I don't know, first of all, I could talk for an hour on each person, so I don't know if you want me to tell the whole story or...
Do you guys want to hear her story? Yeah, I'd love to share.
Okay.
Specifically...
It's actually very inspirational.
Yeah, it's amazing. The whole fax machine thing, I'd love to hear you talk about that part.
Okay, well, first of all, even before that, her dream was to be a lawyer. And she finally, went and through college, and then she took the LSAT and she bombed it. So she picked herself up, she took a course, she took it again, and she did 1 point worse. So what she did is she drove off to Disney, and she auditioned for the role of Goofy in the play. Literally, she was too short, so they gave her a chipmunk. And but in the meantime, before she could even do that, she had to put some time in, so she was busy loading people on rides at Epcot Center. Anyway, after a while of that, she went and she got a job at a company, as she said, that would hire anyone with a pulse. And it was a company that sold fax machines door to door. So they gave her like a little, a phone book with an area code, and she would literally knock on the door and ask people if they wanted to buy a fax machine. And she got police escorts out of buildings, and her card ripped up and doors slammed in her face. But what was good about that is it taught her to sort of be immune to the word no. Oh, and this is a big thing for actors, and we could talk about. I could talk about other people as well, but I'll finish Sarah's story
I might bring
first,
it back to some other
and
people.
then bring me back to the no. But so anyway, so she did that for 8 years, and then one day she did not like how her butt looked in her white pants, and she wished she could wear something under to sort of smooth it all out, but without but like control top pantyhose, but without the feet. So she invented Spanx, and she worked on it for an entire year before telling anybody about it. She told her friends and family that she was busy working on an idea, but she wouldn't tell. And when she finally sat them down, it was after a year, she sat them down and said, okay, it's footless pantyhose. And they all laughed at her, and she was like, no, I'm serious, it's footless. And out of love, they tried to convince her not to do this and not to waste her time and everything. Anyway, it's now, she's now a self-made billionaire. And she says that it's important to keep a young idea secret from anyone who can't directly help it move forward. And her reason is not because of, for what you might think that someone's going to steal your idea. It's sort of to protect yourself, because in the beginning, before you're really invested in something, that's when you're the most vulnerable. And hearing discouraging remarks, like if all your friends and family were laughing and you weren't really that invested, you might give up. But by the time she told everybody about Spanx, she'd been, working on it for a year, and she was already too far along to be, pulled off course.
It seemed like another theme is, most, if not all of these stories, they didn't take no for an answer. They just kept going.
And so one of the most interesting things that I learned in making this book is how many of the people credit early jobs in sales with giving them the skills they needed for their ultimate success. So Sarah's one example. Another example of that is a guy named John Paul DeJoria.
I was about to bring him up.
Yeah, he's amazing. Story. He's another multi-billionaire. He's the co-founder of Patron, the tequila company, and John Paul Mitchell Hair Systems. Yeah, amongst other businesses. He's a real entrepreneur. But he sold encyclopedias door to door, and that taught him, to be immune to the word no. And it also taught him, how to be a persuasive communicator, which is another important thing. But Kathy Ireland is, she's an ex-Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, and she now runs like a $2 billion business, and her name is on over 15,000 products. She's bigger than Martha Stewart, actually. Really?
Did you guys know that? Oh my God.
I know. I think she outsells her by a long shot. I forget the stats, but she really, and she had to sell herself door to door when she was a model, which is like being an actress. She would have to go on these go-sees, and they would reject her for this and that, cut her apart. So she sort of learned to have a thick skin.
But even her, I feel like there were more than one story about like being a newspaper carrier, back in the day, literally getting up and hustling, and she was one of them, right?
Yes. And even when she eventually started her own brand, she had been trying to do it for years. Her brand is called Kathy Ireland Worldwide, and her name's on a bunch of things. But before that, she tried skincare line, a beer company, several arts and crafts projects, and they all failed. But I think it was from her, time selling herself that she sort of thickened her skin and was like, all right, I'm going to keep going.
And that makes me think, I'm just jumping all over these stories. I want to come back to John Paul DeJoria for a moment, because he had a quote that I literally wrote down. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is that successful people do all the things that unsuccessful people don't want to do.
Yep. It's kind of, back to Michael Bloomberg, don't think you're above anything. A lot of people in the book say, like, whenever you're doing something, give it your all. Even if you're sweeping the floor in an office, do it well, you'll get noticed. Like, somebody will notice you. Les Moonves, who's the president of CBS and the CEO of CBS, also talks about that.
Well, and he started out as an actor, so this is a good story, too.
Yes.
Share a little bit of that, yeah.
He started out as an actor. And he was doing okay. He got some work, but basically he was being a bartender to make ends meet. And then, an opportunity came up for him to direct a play. And he realized that he preferred being on the other side of the camera. And, he didn't feel the way Anderson Cooper felt. He enjoyed it, but he didn't have that passion. It wasn't like, this is what I meant to do. He liked it. He also, I think, looked around and he didn't think that he was as good as a lot of other people, which brings me to something that I love, because passion is one thing, but Warren Buffett brings this one step further, and he says, you need to do something you're passionate about, but it's very important to know your strengths and weaknesses and do something within what he calls your circle of competence. He quotes one of his friends, who's Tom Watson, who actually it's not his friend, but he quotes Tom Watson, who's one of the founders of IBM. And he said, I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. So, if I was really passionate about being a singer, no matter how passionate I was, I just know I don't have a good voice. So I would never, it's not in my circle of competence. Yeah. So you have to be realistic with certain things.
And I just want to take a beat here, because that's an important, we deal with that a lot in coaching, getting more clear on exactly not just what I love to do, but what I can be competitive at in this industry. Right. There's just so many, people wanting to do it. Not only is it important for you to love it, but also really feel as if you have it, and not doubt that. And I know that can be a tricky thing when there's a lot of other people doing it.
Yeah, so he found, he loves what he does, and it's in the world, that he was in when he was an actor, but it's just in a different capacity. And living with the uncertainty of when his next paycheck would come in wasn't for him. It's not for everybody. Yeah.
And you gotta get real with yourself to be able to know what is really for you if that's not it. And that's what he did. And look where he is now.
Yes, exactly. He couldn't be happier.
I want to talk about Matthew Weiner, because he's one of my favorite stories in the book. Anybody a fan of Mad Men? Yeah. So he talks in this book about not hiding the brushstrokes, and when it comes to his craft. In other words, really he believes in sharing his creative process, so it's not this demystifying sort of like, keeping it elusive and magical. I got to go to the Museum of the Moving Image where his exhibit was, and it was fascinating to see all of his notes. They had the writer's room with the original, storyboard up there. And you really, can see not just he, first of all, 7 years in the making from the idea to getting on screen, which some of you may know, but also just how much it takes, the tiny army of people to get it done.
Yeah, I don't know if this is even in the essay or not. It might have been cut, but he did say this to me.
Ooh, share.
That people who were fans of the show would come up to him and call him a genius, and he would think, if you could see how hard I worked on every single thing, you would never see it. Because people look at a finished product and think that you just sort of easily, wrote it out that way. But if they saw, the years it took to write, one script or something.
And I might misquote this, but I remember something from his story about how every day, 7 years of having that and waiting for it to be picked up, and rejection after rejection from network after network, he continued to, he acted as if tomorrow it was going to happen.
He was so passionate. He believed in it so much that he said he lived every day as if it was going to happen tomorrow. And that's something else that people talk about with sales, because, with when John Paul DeJoria was selling encyclopedias, he would get doors slammed in his face. And he knew that if he wanted to make a sale at the 16th house, after getting 15 doors shut in his face. He had to be as enthusiastic at that house as he would have at the first.
Auditions, guys.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just the reality. It's a numbers game, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, on that topic, Kathy Ireland gives a quote, and I love this. She says, if you never fail, it means you're not trying hard enough. And basically, if you can, eat that and have it inside you, it makes it so much easier when you fail, because instead of feeling bad, you think, all right, I'm doing my job. Like, this is what's supposed to happen. And I used her quote literally when my book came out. I wrote a lot of articles, and one of the places I wanted to have an article was Forbes. And so I sent one of the editors an article that I wrote, and it took me like a week to write the article. It wasn't like I just rattled one off. And he said, nah. And so I was like, all right, I'll try something else. So I did another one and worked hard and sent another one, and it got rejected. And then I wrote back to the guy and said, okay, Kathy Ireland says, if you never fail, you're not trying hard enough. Do you mind if I send you another one? And he didn't even write me back. But I wrote another one anyway, sent it in, and it made it. And then the other articles I used for other things, and they were even more successful than the one that the Forbes guy picked. So there, he didn't even pick the best article. They went in Fortune.
Amazing. I mean, I love that. And I, we talk a lot about networking, actors and networking, and this idea, 9 times out of 10, I hear actors sort of play it safe. I don't want to, I don't want to come across as the desperate, actor. I don't want to come across as needy. Can you talk about sort of how, or can you think of any of these interviewees that you talked to, how they were able to find the tenacity and not accept no for an answer, but also not come across as sort of overbearing and or burn a bridge, because that's such a fear that I think you guys, anybody relate to that? It's fear of like, I don't want to offend them, I don't want to bother them too much. I
think you have to find the right balance of polite persistence. Partly, I think partly like you have to have a monitor to read the situation. It's hard to say exactly what to do if you don't know the particular situation. But I had to really do this a lot when I was approaching people for my book, because to get these 30 people in took me 5 years, and pretty much I would say most of the people who were in it rejected me at one point before they even said yes. Some of them rejected me a lot. The toughest person to get in here was the architect, Frank Gehry. And the story with that is I went on his company website, and there was an email address. So I sent in a request, and they wrote back and said no. Then I waited a little while. I sent in another request. Somebody else wrote back and said no. Then I found that my friend's father's girlfriend said she knew Frank Gehry, so she would like to ask for me. She was offered to ask for me, and she asked, and she got ignored. And then a little while later, I said, could you try it again? Maybe, somebody didn't read it or whatever, and she got ignored again. And then I asked again. And somehow, it must have been a different assistant that day. She got back to me and said, oh, okay, well, let me see. And could you, send some more information? So I overnighted a copy of my first book so they could see some of my work. And anyhow, eventually he said yes. And then proceeded to cancel on me for 1.5 years. Literally 1.5 years. All the while, I had to, every time he got a new assistant, he got 4 new assistants in that time, I had to explain to them what he allegedly said he would do. Because I was like, I had to be sending old email chains. Anyway, he's in the book.
Amazing. Well, can you just tell us like what kept you going, or even share. Yeah, I'd like to hear for you. Like, did you at any point just be like, you know what, that's it? Like, I've tried enough.
Well, okay, what was interesting with this, and, with me putting in requests to like a publicist or an agent, is a lot of times the real decision maker never even heard about me. So I was bounced by, a gatekeeper.
Gatekeepers.
A gatekeeper. But so I sort of knew that, like, sometimes you call somebody or you ask if someone could do something or look at whatever. But and they, it's busy people can't field every request they get because they get a lot of requests. So they have gatekeepers as they should. But sometimes the gatekeepers bounce something that might have been accepted had it gotten through. But it goes back down to the passion. I knew, like, if I could just get him to tell his story, I think he'll be happy with the way he's portrayed. And I think he'll really help so many people. So I had that passion.
Was there anybody you wanted that did not make it into the book?
Name a woman who's not in the book. I probably asked her. It was
Gloria
hard.
Steinem.
Yeah, I asked her. She did. I mean, so this is the thing. No matter.
I said Gloria Steinem.
Yes, and I asked her, and she didn't do it. I think she was writing her own book or something like that. But no matter what you do, this book, being an actor, being an entrepreneur, anything, you get rejected a lot out there, and you just can't let it discourage you or depress you, because then you can't show up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you just have to know that that's the name of the game. And it happened to me. It happens to everybody.
That makes me think about going back to Warren Buffett and how he talks about habits, and that's something that we work on a lot. That I think he says, most behavior is habitual. Bad habits are hard to kick, but good habits are too. Why not decide to have good habits and form them as soon as you can?
Yeah, and he says the chains of habit are too light to feel until they're too heavy to be broken. Yeah. So, you don't notice something and you get in a bad habit, and you've got to like stop it as soon as you can.
Oh, and I loved the end of his last story too about the car.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Yeah. He talks about the importance of taking care of your mind and your body, because it's the only mind and body you're ever going to have. And meanwhile, we should listen to him because he is like sharp as a tack. And, well, he drinks Coke all day, so I don't know, maybe. But he is so incredible. And so he talks to kids sometimes, and he says, let's say that someone said to you, I'm going to buy you your first car, and I'm going to get you any car you want, but it's the only car you're ever going to have for the rest of your life. How are you going to treat that car? Like, if you're not going to leave it out to get rusty, you're going to, take care of it anyway. And he says that's like you. You have one mind and one body.
And mindset, that's everything. And that's what I'm hearing from these examples and from you, that, there was a perseverance that just, you guys kept going and were unwilling to settle.
Yes. There's a quote from Ian Schrager. I know we're across from Studio 54, right? Yeah. Well, he is the founder of the original Studio 54. And he has an interesting story, which is that he started that nightclub, and he was young, and it was wildly successful. And he and his partner, Steve Rubel, got intoxicated by the success, and they ended up going to prison because they didn't pay income tax. Like, it wasn't just not paying income tax. They hid the cash. They didn't declare all the cash they were getting, And so they ended up losing all their money. They went to prison for 13 months. And when they came out, they were $2 million in debt. It took him 10 years to get back to where he was when he left off, like after going to prison. But he eventually reinvented himself as a hotelier. And he's responsible for this whole boutique hotel revolution. Before him, hotels were just for tourists. And he started the whole concept of lobby socializing. How now, like, locals go to a hotel to meet up and hang out. That's all from him. But what he says is, he says, in the end, there's so little that separates us. The people who want success the most and are relentless about pursuing it are the ones who get it. So, and he says there's very little in life that you can't recover from. So you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
And also, I'm thinking about Warren Buffett and how, as a public speaker, that was something that was a real...
Yeah, Warren Buffett, up till the age of 20, he was petrified of speaking in public. So much so that he would arrange his life so that he never found himself in front of a crowd. He says that just the thought of it would make him literally throw up. So he wouldn't take a class if it required doing a presentation or anything. And then when he finally went to business school at Columbia, and he was at Columbia because he got rejected from Harvard Business School, and that was his dream to go there. But anyway, I'm sure they're very sorry to not have him at their alumni gatherings.
That's another running theme of what
do they know?
And, the dream is Harvard. You don't get the dream, and therefore you feel like you're off course. But actually, they all looked back and said, I'm so glad I didn't, in this case, get into Harvard, because he ended up finding his mentor. Right?
Yes. But wait, where?
Sorry, I cut you off. He was at Columbia.
Okay, so he decided he had to get over this fear. So he signed up for a Dale Carnegie public speaking course. And he says, if you go to his office now, it got him over his fear of public speaking. And he says that $100 certificate is more important than any diploma he has. So he has that up on his wall, no diploma. And so basically, it taught him how important communication skills are. And he says, no matter what you do, you want people to sort of follow your ideas. So if you're, in sales, you want people to buy what you're trying to, sell. If you could be a teacher, you want people to listen to you. And so he says that, just a small improvement in communication skills can make a huge difference in your success.
One more essay that I just want to touch on, because I know we've covered a lot of ground here. Marina, how do you pronounce her last name? Abramovic, yeah.
Or at least that's how I do.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I don't know.
She talks about something that her professor told her about drawing, right? If you draw with your right hand and become so skilled that you can even close your eyes and make any kind of drawing, immediately change to the left.
Yes.
Can you expand on what she means there?
She talks about to keep moving. Like, I think that for a lot of people, in order to be happy, you have to be working on something, and you feel fulfilled. So people can sort of change their goals as you go along. So, another person who talks about this is a surfer who's in the book, Laird Hamilton. And he's sort of, like, if you become the world champion of whatever, and then you're going to just sit on your butt, that's depressing. So think of something else. It could be that you're really into your charity or something, but you always have to be working towards something.
That's great. Should we move on? I'm wondering where Melissa is. Maybe we'll move on to the questions here from the group. Hopefully I can read them. Okay. Nicole, in the midst of changes in the entertainment industry, new channels, which may be disruptors, how do you both stay your course while also being able to pivot towards new directions?
Well, I think a big theme in getting there, because a lot of these people did not know where they were going to end up when they started. And they all say, you don't need to, but what's important is to keep your eyes open for new opportunities and not be on a rigid course. So I think, that's how. You've got to, if you're too rigid, you're going to miss out on some possibly really great opportunities. Like, had Les Moonves said, all right, all I'm going to do is act. I'm not going to direct this play. He wouldn't have realized his love for being on the other side of the camera. I have Gillian Michaels. She runs a health and wellness empire. She started out as a talent agent. She got fired. And that's when she allowed herself to do what she really loved, which was, be a trainer. And then she started a gym and the whole thing. She wasn't doing that because she felt bad from, social pressure. She felt like that wasn't such a smart thing to do. And she was hanging out with a crowd of college graduates who sort of looked down on her for being a trainer. But she allowed herself then to do what she really loved doing and, looked for opportunities. And now, she's kicked ass in that field.
And what I love about her story is she talks about vulnerability being a key component.
Yes.
And the idea that, you've got to first get vulnerable with yourself about what really matters to you. I see a lot of actors come to me with goals that are not really their goals. It's like, I want this because I think it's what I want, or it's what somebody else has that looks good, or it's what my parents want, or, it's what I used to want. But at the end of the day, when we go a little bit deeper, we find there's something else that's like their spark. And that's listening to reading Gillian's story, that, stood out to me, that she really went to that place of like, actually, I'm really passionate about helping these people.
Yeah. Agreed.
Oh, I said it all.
Yeah, you said it all.
And I think as far as the, goal setting, a lot of people that we work with, we don't say that what you set your, eye on is exactly how it's going to go. It's really about having a vision, something that you're really connected to, almost like a North Star. And then the plan and what you do to get there is absolutely malleable, and part of it is really setting the goal and then listening and tuning into the opportunities and being available for course correcting. So I agree with you. It's when we get fixed in this idea that goal setting is I have to have this rigid plan, I always say the map is not the terrain.
And another big theme in getting there is sort of to learn from your mistakes and then move on. Like, you just have to keep going. So sometimes you get knocked down and you get back up and you try again. Sometimes you get knocked down and you get back up and you think, you know what, I'm going to change. I learned something from that. I'm going to change the direction so slightly and do something else, but you got to keep going in either direction.
Was it Michael Bloomberg that talked about really leaving the past in the past and it's done, move
that
on?
He does, yes. He says he's incredible with that. He learns, from his mistakes, and then he moves on. He just leaves them in the dust. I can't do it as well as he seems to.
Well, and I see a lot of wasted, and I don't want to say wasted energy, just so much energy focused on what should have been, would have been, could have been from years. Some people 10 years ago come to a coaching session and they're still holding on to the story from many, many years ago, which I get. Something painful had happened, something that, are you finding something in there?
Yeah. But you keep talking.
Yeah, that really created what we like to term an inner critic, that you start to really believe this story about yourself that's not actually true. But it feels, the feelings are real, but it's not actually true. Go ahead.
Okay, this comes from a lawyer named David Boies.
Yeah.
He is like, a top lawyer, and he says, my career has had its fair share of victories and failures. And I like this quote because it's applicable to anything and any career. He says, it's important not to be either too encouraged or too discouraged by what's happening at any particular moment. No matter what you do, there will be times when things go well and times when things go badly. The only thing for sure in either scenario is that things will change. When something good happens, I try to enjoy it. When something bad happens, I try to understand why it happened, but in either case, the next day I'm on to something else.
That's
Bam.
helpful. It's helpful to process the current events of the day.
Yeah.
But I think that that's real, that at the end of the day, it's happened. So, what are we going to go do now with that?
Yes. Yeah. That's why I had lunch today.
Yeah. Me too. That's why we're all here.
Yeah.
Ed. Hi, Ed. How are you? Ed asks, can you talk about the value of a mentor, both having and being one?
Being one, it's important to give back. If you have something to offer, it's like karma. I don't mind asking people for favors in the world because I know I do so many people favors, and I think if you give back, it's the same thing. So I think that's just a good way to go through life, and it's essential to ask for advice, when you need it, and that's a strong thing to do. And my view on mentors is I view mentors the way that I view friends. I have a lot of friends, and I take different things from each of them. And I think you can do the same thing with mentors. Like, you don't need to think that you have to have one grand mentor who's your official mentor. It's not like a husband or wife or a partner. It's more like a friend. So there could be people you go to for this kind of advice and people who you go to for another kind of advice. And then I think it's a little bit more of a relaxing thing than to just have pressure with finding one mentor.
I love that. And the idea that there's always somebody who's, been where you are, that especially reading this book, I felt like I was getting mentorship from these stories in a way. And so even if you maybe can't access somebody right now, there are ways to find anything online, to watch. I mean, there's so many ways to get inspiration and perspective. I do encourage people to really go after, a relationship that feels like the right fit, that somebody may be accessible, and see how it can be a real win-win. People love giving back.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for like one more, two more. I can't. One. Oh, you've got that, but okay, I've got these. I'll take that. How does one get over a rejection? What was the most important story you heard about someone recovering from rejection?
Matt Weiner does talk about rejection a lot, and he says something interesting about how you can't take it personally. He says that, like, when someone's rejecting you, you've got to process the fact that they don't want you, but you can't always listen to the reason why. Because people sometimes feel like they have to give a reason, and they give some sort of capricious justification to stop from hurting your feelings or whatever. And so I think you just can't, you just have to move on, but not listen to every bit of feedback that you get, because then you're going to sort of end up running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to sort of please an imaginary audience. But he does say that if there's someone who you really admire, who gives you, like he used Mike Nichols. If Mike Nichols said, I think you should do this to your script or something, then he would listen. But it's just, if for every casting director, they're like, you this, you that, you'll be like something without a face at the end of it.
And this idea of having your own internal compass so that it's, I think we tend to give so much meaning to the rejection. And yeah, it means something, but it doesn't mean everything. And when you start believing that it means everything, then...
That's why, though, yeah. And that's why I have a 13-year-old daughter. I want her to have a job in sales because... and me doing this book was a job in sales because I got rejected, and now if someone rejects me, it's like I didn't even hear it. I just keep going, and that's just, the way to get over it is to know that it happens to everybody. And pat yourself on the back for doing a good job. If you never fail, you're not trying hard enough. And that, like if you're learning to ski and you never fall, don't be so proud of yourself. You're probably not like getting so good, And
it's what you guys have all signed up for. So, really accepting it, which means, the definition of acceptance that I like to reference is not wishing for anything to be different. So it's when we have a rejection and then all of a sudden it's like, it shouldn't be. And then we fight it and we resist it. We can't move forward, Yeah,
and you can't help get depressed. Like when I did get rejections, I would get down for a little bit, but not that long.
Yeah. And I would say have a place to process it and have a process for how to manage it, so that instead of it taking a week, 2 weeks to get over, it can be,
get in bed, watch one show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But go hang out with a friend and, spend time with somebody who's going to lift you up, not sit in the sour of it, because that's another thing. We could go on and on.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much, Gillian.
You're welcome.
You guys, go get this book. It is so, if you're not sold by us, I don't know what we'll do it, but it's a fantastic book.
And whoever grabs this.
That's a free book. Oh my gosh. Mine is all written up on. I can't give it. But I was so inspired by it. I'm doing an event at the end of the year, and I'm just going to buy a bunch and give it away because it's so amazing. That's how much I love this book. So thank you, Gillian. Thank you, SAG. Thank you guys for being here.